Howdy y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Phrygian Cap. This may look familiar to you. You may see it in such modern day renditions as the Smurf or lawn gnome. However, the history of this cap is far more esoteric and dates back into BC, Babylonian, and Sumerian times. However, I'm going to begin talking about Phrygia. And this was an area of ancient Anatolia, which is now basically modern-day Hungary. And Phrygia, they say, was an area ruled by King Midas. But further into that story, we will talk about the god of Phrygia. And she was a female god, which was rare for the time. Now, she was known as the Mother of the Hunt, Mother Earth, or simply Mother, but this was the main god that they worshipped in Phrygia. What's interesting about her is the mythos story behind her. Now, they say that she ruled from heaven, and she was always accompanied by her 2 lions. And you'll see this in many depictions of her in artwork. Now, she's always depicted as a, we'll call it, festively plump woman. And this was to show abundance, much like we see the cornucopia in modern day renditions of liberty and the such. This is meant to show we have more than was necessary, or we're set for the future, So she's depicted as a larger being. And her story says that she sits and watches over Phrygia. And one day she notices Attis. Attis is a young Phrygian boy. And she becomes infatuated with Attis, basically using her godly powers to seduce him. And as the mythical narrative goes, or as the story goes, as the god story goes of Phrygia, they say that this drove the boy mad, and this caused him to castrate himself. And at the time in Phrygia, they were, they say, sacrificing bulls to their mother god, who also went by the name of Cybele. And it's interesting, Cybele, because she was a larger woman. So just funny that maybe that's where the word belly originally comes from, but I digress. So this act is done by Attis of basically changing himself forever. And while the bull is being sacrificed to Cybele, they start removing the scrotum of the bull. And this is what the Phrygian cap is made out of. It was initially basically an emblem to represent Attis and his sacrifice. And this was made by the Phrygians to be worn by the most noble of their men to show their dedication to their faith. Now, Phrygia and its history is basically lost beyond that story, because Phrygia was taken over by Rome about 133 BC. And from this point onward, their history really mixes with the Roman history. But this is where I want to get into something interesting. We always talk about how many roads seem to lead back to Rome, and this is just another one. Because just the use of the cap by the Phrygian people doesn't really denote or make sense as to why it would be seen so much in artwork throughout all ancient times. So that's where we go to Rome. And it said that in Roman times, when they were freeing the slaves, to denote a man was free, they would give him a cap, and this cap was called a pileus, or pileus. However, this cap, much like the Phrygian cap, was basically the same design, you could say. They look very similar, and it was meant for the same purposes, they say, that so much so, by the fall of Rome, the 2 caps were used interchangeably. So you have this Phrygian cap basically being adopted by the Romans as a symbol of freedom. And this would stem over for the next almost 1,000 years, they say. After the fall of Rome, it took until roughly the 1700s for the Phrygian cap to again be understood and representing liberty and freedom. However, we do see many depictions of this cap in that time period where they say it was not in use and where Rome had fallen, so we really didn't understand what this cap was even being used for. Yet we have different artists all around the world that are still depicting it in their artworks, and I find that to be very interesting, and that's one of the things that we have noticed. So we'll dive back into what the narrative says. The narrative says, when the Renaissance period came around, and when we started adapting Roman works, and we started having more people becoming educated, that is when these people that were feeling oppressed basically adopted this Phrygian cap as their own. They took this cap on to mean basically a symbol of their own fight for their own freedom and their own liberty. So in these different areas that were rising up against the Holy Roman rule and against royal rule, they started adopting this Phrygian cap. And this was echoed really all throughout Europe, but especially in France during the French Revolution. And they say even today the Phrygian cap is still worn in France when they celebrate their revolution. And I think that's very, very interesting. But one of the things that was really awesome, or that I did not know that the Phrygian cap was used for, is something called liberty poles. And this whole idea is that different areas that felt like rebelling, or had a group of people, had enough people gathered that felt like they were being oppressed, they would build these large poles, and on the top of these poles they would put the largest Phrygian caps that they could find. Basically, they would put these hats on top of these poles. These weren't flag poles, they say, but these were freedom poles or liberty poles, and they would put this symbol of liberty. They would sew huge Phrygian caps and put them on top of these poles. And they would also do this on trees. They had different designated trees that they would call liberty trees. And they would basically sew a hat for this tree. And these trees would then become designations of freedom, and basically people speaking out on what they felt was oppression. And there's actually a funny story that I found where they say that these liberty poles were repeatedly being torn down by the British in the 1760s and the 1770s. So much so that one of the first skirmishes of the Revolutionary War happened when a liberty tree was cut down in America. So you have these liberty poles being used not only in Europe, but it made it the whole way to America. And I just found that to be very, very interesting. So from this time forward, you begin seeing the Phrygian cap being used to represent liberty and justice. You see it on different coins that are being minted. You see it in artwork, especially in fine art, like pieces like this one, like liberty or death. And you also see it being incorporated into different flags of freed nations. Another thing I found to be really interesting about the Phrygian cap is that the Doge of Venice actually ended up adopting the Phrygian cap to be their own, which that is a part of the papal command and part of the Holy Roman Empire. And I found it to be very interesting that we have in the Renaissance times people rising up against royal rule and rising up against the Holy Roman Empire, and they're using the Phrygian cap to represent their rise up. And basically, to counteract this, the Holy Roman Empire also adopts a form of the Phrygian cap to be worn by their cardinals. And I just find that to be something that's very interesting and I never heard talked about. There are some more out there theories regarding the Phrygian cap, one of which says that the people of Phrygia were actually of a smaller stature than normal human beings. Much like the dwarves or elves of Lord of the Rings, they had advancements in woodworking and different technologies that far exceeded any other civilization of the time. And I find this to be a great dichotomy of the ancient depictions of the Phrygian cap on Babylonian and Sumerian gods, as well as the cap also being depicted on most artwork showing the Amazonians. And this is just very interesting to me that we have myths of both very large and very small but advanced people using the Phrygian cap. We also have countless depictions of the three wise men, as written about in the Bible, but also written about in many other ancient texts. And these wise men are often depicted wearing the Phrygian cap, while many times they also carry advanced technological gifts. Now, I believe the most outlandish and out there theory I've heard about the Phrygian cap is that the Phrygian cap was made for an elongated skull. Now, you find elongated skulls all throughout different histories, and especially in North and South America. But what I find interesting is that they say, look at the cap. If the cap was on an elongated skull, it would fit snug. And I just find it also interesting because if you give merit to that sort of discussion, you can argue that this could be the reason why ancient gods and goddesses and different beings of seemingly unlimited power are depicted wearing this Phrygian cap. It's just another really out there and mostly unprovable theory. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to share what I've been able to find so far about the Phrygian cap. It's something that I've seen used in many ancient artworks, and I've always asked myself exactly what it represents. Now, I wasn't exactly able to pinpoint that. In the most simple sense, we can say it represents freedom and liberty. In the most esoteric sense, we can say it represents hidden knowledge and something we probably will never be able to understand completely. However, I hope this video was informative for you, and at the very least, I hope it was a little bit entertaining. The crazy theories at the end, I don't give much validity to them, although I do like to talk about those things because we never do know, do we? I thank you very much for being here. The channel is growing very quickly, and I appreciate all of you. I love seeing you discuss these topics down below in the comments and figure things out amongst yourselves. It's really awesome to see the communication that we have amongst this group, and I really appreciate you. And I can't wait to see you on the next video. So please let me know what you think about the Phrygian cap, or Cybele, or Attis, or any of the Roman depictions, or any of the modern day depictions, as well as any of the theories about the cap. And we will talk more very soon.